This chapter was absolutely insane. What a finisher for what I think was probably a fairly solid fight. Gaolang winning was of course what so many people had hoped for, and of course they got just that. Gaolang is the winner. Gaolang has beaten Jurota, someone who is basically a peer with Kano Agito, and of course we know this chain of the strongest. Basically this connects Oma, this potentially connects Kuroki as well, it connects Lo Long. It means that Gaolang actually belongs in this tournament. He isn't here by chance. He is one of the strongest in the verse. Many of the characters in the Kengan Omega story have been getting much more stronger. And this is something that I think has been happening way before this point, because I think one of the big moments, at least for me, in terms of like the entire verse catching up to basically the peak of the verse, was with Kuryu versus Nico. But this is of course a chapter review and breakdown, so let's cover how this fight ends, and I'll save my thoughts for, or at least the rest of my thoughts, for the end. The chapter starts off with what I'm going to assume is Jurota's mental realm thingy, and we actually see basically the ghost of Meguro Musaki right behind him, and he's basically having a talk with, they're talking with each other. Essentially, I've made a lot of jokes with, of course, Meguro Musaki has been basically Jurota's stan, but it seems like this mental factor of Jurota is something that is being pushed quite heavily. Jurota might actually end up being insane to a certain extent. But of course Meguro, or basically Stan Meguro, is basically talking to Jurota about how ironic it is that he can't use pre-initiative, and because he can't use pre-initiative, some of his more advanced moves cannot be used on Gaolang anymore. And so Gaolang, being a foresight killer, has sort of limited Jurota's range of moves that he could possibly do, which does explain of course how the fight has been progressing in the story, that Jurota has barely been able to do much of anything here except wait for the perfect time to do the swing. And so Meguro is here, he's basically confirming this same fact, and that if basically Ghost Meguro was in the same position, he would have done a similar thing to what Jurota ended up doing, which was basically a brute force approach, which is something that of course Arashiyama is still doing, as we cut right back into the fight and Gaolang is wailing on Jurota. It is pretty bad, because it's one of those instances where you can basically tell Gaolang's Muay Thai is just far better than his boxing. At least it does more damage and he seems to dominate with it a lot more. And while of course he's trying to rush Jurota down, Jurota tries to of course go for a grab with both of his hands, trying to trap Gaolang, but Gaolang ends up just kicking him in the stomach, sending his ass basically flying, leaving Jurota still empty-handed. We then get some commentary of course that is probably from Jerry again, where he's basically talking about how this seems so one-sided, that Gaolang, he's basically wailing on Jurota and can barely do anything. However, Jerry then of course takes a closer look at Gaolang and realizes that Gaolang is sweating buckets. We then get of course some clarification from Yamashita, and Yamashita is noting to the fact that yes, it may seem like Gaolang is dominating the fight, but again, all it really takes is one mistake for all of this to go wrong for Gaolang. And of course, because Jurota is someone who can basically change the tide of the entire fight with a single move, Gaolang has to constantly be on guard. He has to constantly make the most calculated decisions while trying to basically injure Jurota as much as he can. And so because of the nature of what is going on, it's still technically 50-50. But after Yamashita's explanation, we now go to the moment of truth. Gaolang goes in for another strike, and we get some narration that this was the moment. This was the moment where the winner of the fight would be determined, and I was pretty excited because we then knew what was going to happen at this point based on how Jurota had mapped out the fight, and that was of course the God Glow coming into action at this point, with Gaolang throwing a heavy fast right. That of course is the God Glow, but Jurota manages to actually catch Gaolang and swing him as well. And not only does he grab him and swing him, they come crashing down together, and Gaolang has basically been thrown. With of course Jerry being the commentator, he's basically saying, oh my god, what an upset, hyping up Jurota. This is the man that took out Agito, oh my god. Now the first time I read this, I was like, oh my god, and he actually managed to do it. But then I noticed something. Jurota hasn't been announced the winner yet. But of course Yamashita is still amazed at what's happened. That of course Arashiyama had a strategy this entire time, which we knew from the past chapter, with Gaolang actually saying that hey, Jurota actually managed to adapt to the speed of Gaolang's punches towards the end of the fight, and that of course Jurota is a genius for doing that. We then cut to Agito saying, man, we got a score to settle Jurota, but it won't be today. We then see the panel of Jurota. He's basically knocked out. And of course, Gaolang had a 500 IQ play to basically counter what Arashiyama was of course thinking of. And Gaolang was supposed to have an answer to this problem, because this is exactly how he lost to Carlos the first time around in Kengan vs. Purgatory. His loss actually happened the exact way that Jurota's plan was basically going, only of course there was the ring out situation. So Gaolang has had this type of problem before, and so he had of course prepared for it, and while Arashiyama was throwing him, he actually kneed him at the back of the head. Combine that with the God Glow and my man was finished. He was done. There was nothing he could do from that point. He was going to get knocked out whether he liked it or not. Keep in mind that the God Glow was something that he was of course aware of, and he said that had the potential to knock him out, but there was the added knee attack, which probably did more damage as well. With everyone saying Gaolang is impressive, Gaolang, Agito, and of course Rama, with Gaolang being announced the winner of the fight. Of course, we do get Gaolang giving Jurota his big ups, hey look, you were strong, you were a real samurai, so some stuff like that of course. But the end of the chapter actually ends off with a stare down between Gaolang and Agito, with Gaolang saying he's always wanted that rematch between him and Agito, and Agito saying of course he's honored, may they meet in the finals, assuming he even gets there. Both Gaolang and Agito is what I mean. With that, the chapter ends, and so yeah, good chapter. I think one of the things that the chapter definitely made me think, it definitely made me think that Jurota had actually won for a moment. Like there was a split moment where I thought he actually did it, and Gaolang now has 3 losses in a row. But the subversion was written pretty well, I would say. I expect most people to be happy with the outcome. The question, of course, is whether the next fight will be as good and as hype as this one. What are my thoughts on this fight? You know, coming off of this chapter alone, I still have to reread the whole fight. I thought that this was a pretty solid fight. The potential it had, I think it lived up to it more or less. And I'm excited to see the future for, of course, Gaolang in this tournament, as well as Jurota probably way after, of course, this point in the story. Like, he had his big win against Agito, which cemented him as one of the strongest in the verse, of course. But now people are gonna have to take Gaolang just as seriously as Jurota, because again, the difference between who won that fight was pretty slight. This was a high div fight, all things considered. And so I can definitely see people downplaying Jurota, saying of course he's done nothing, but I think that definitely ignores the commentary of course you could say people like Yamashita, what we observe from Jurota, what he's thinking in that fight, and all this other stuff. But yeah, that's the chapter review. Don't forget to like and sub, and until next time, take it easy.